I called Mama. She was so happy she cried. She wants you to have her wedding gown. It's white lace.
Yeah, that's good. I can't get married in your mother's dress.
You are wonderful.
Thank you. I've worked hard to become so. I admit it, you are better than I am. Then why are you smiling?
Because I know something you don't know.
And what is that?
I am not left-handed.
Well, sir, you were a cowardly son of a bitch. You just shot an unarmed man.
Well, he should have harmed himself. He's gonna decorate his saloon with my friend.
It's always so nice to start the program with such a tender, heartfelt family opening, such as a young boy being dragged into his bedroom mirror to an unknown fate. Hi, I'm Mark. I am the Cinemaniac. This show is called The Cinemaniacs, plural. That is you as a Cinemaniac, I as a Cinemaniac, and we all together royally are Cinemaniacs. So very, very short little roster of films here. Mostly it's a catch-up show for me because I didn't see everything I could have or should have over the long holiday break. There's even more that I haven't seen. We'll try to pick away at those as we go. First up is a sequel. Many, 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 many years later, sequel to a family film classic. Some might say it's a remake. I might say it's a remake. Find out after we play the clip. Emily Blunt stars as everyone's favorite descending from the heavens nanny, and Lin-Manuel Miranda is there to be a street service person to help her along, and there are kids in trouble, and only one woman can take care of the Banks family, and you'll see what happens when Mary Poppins returns. So my big concern, fear, wonderment about this film from seeing that trailer and some teaser trailers was that this was just pretty much going to be a remake of Mary Poppins. Disney is in the remake game right now. Disney has never been wildly original. They always, even in the very beginning, they were adapting existing stories and properties and things like that. But Disney has seen to it now to basically, what they're doing is remaking every animated classic they've had in the last, 60 years. And a lot of times, like with the Sam Raimi Oz prequel, I call them C-makes or requels. It's too much of a classic to remake it. People would really be upset by that. So let's say it's a prequel or a sequel, but it's pretty much going to be beat for beat the same movie. That's what Mary Poppins Returns is. I'm not saying everybody in it isn't good, but structurally it's the same movie. The story here is that the children from the original Mary Poppins films are now grown up. The son, the young boy, is an adult. His wife has died. He's in financial straits. They may lose the house. He's obsessed with trying to solve his financial situation at the expense of his family, his children. And then you have his sister, who is now grown. She's fighting for women's suffrage or some kind of social issue, and she's trying to come back home to help him, save the house. Mary Poppins slides in to help solve the problems, help take care of the kids, while the adults are trying to situate their financial situation. And it's the same thing again. You have the musical number that results in live action interacting with an animated sequence. You have, instead of a chimney sweep, you have a guy who lights the street lights, played by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who people may know from Hamilton. And it's pretty. He's the Dick Van Dyke character. It's a Cockney Street guy who's Mary Poppins' platonic friend. Instead of having the chimney sweeps do a dance on the rooftops, you have all of the guys who light the street lights doing parkour and extreme X Games dirt bike, mountain biking in a park. It's the same thing. So much of this movie is just the same. Instead of supercalifragilistic, you get a nonsense song. So it's the same thing all over again. How is Emily Blunt as Mary Poppins? She's fine. She's great. But this is what I'm trying to get my head around. Is this movie supposed to be the same people from the original so many years later and they're played by different people? Is this supposed to be another adaptation of that material? Is it supposed to be something different? If it's supposed to be the same people, Mary Poppins is kind of very, I don't want to say nasty, but she's not very upbeat in this film. She seems very stern and she doesn't smile a lot in this film. And my memory of Julie Andrews in the original film is that she was very happy, very lovely, stern when she needed to be, but it was very, very up. And this Mary Poppins seems like she's scowling or correcting someone more than she's doing anything else. The kids are fine. The kids are likable. There's a lot of whimsy. The opening titles feel very classic Disney, where you get all these painted backgrounds and painted scenes from locations in the film you're about to see, and the end credits do that too. Some of the musical numbers are fun and creative, and the effects are really good. For me, when I originally saw, and it could be a facet of my age or whatever, but when I saw Mary Poppins for the first time in a theatrical re-release, which Disney used to do all the time, and I think we really lost something when Disney stopped doing the theatrical re-releases, when they came out with the film Saving Mr. Banks several years ago, which was about what it took to get Mary Poppins to the screen. I thought it was a huge mistake to not re-release Mary Poppins at that time, because these two films basically would help each other theatrically. Anyway, I saw Mary Poppins as a kid in the theater, and I walked out of there knowing enough words to most of those songs to sing them for the next several years. This movie, I didn't find any of the songs memorable. They're very much like Broadway type songs, and they're done by people who have done a lot of movie and Broadway musicals. And the director had done the film version of Chicago. So there's a good pedigree here, but they just weren't catchy. They weren't that interesting to me. And then, like I said, when you have the chimney sweep equivalent production number where all these guys are on like mountain bikes doing all kinds of crazy stunts, I'm like, this feels like the 90s or 2000s. This doesn't feel like when the film is supposed to be set, which is pre-World War II England, sort of Depression era England. Which is a nice setting, and you have a good supporting cast. You have David Warner as the old ship captain who fires the gun on top of the house all the time. And to see David Warner in a movie is always cool. I always knew him as a bad guy from like the bad guy in Tron and the bad guy in Time Bandits and the bad guy in Time After Time. Nice to see him get work and be a good guy in a movie. And you have various other people who are good. And there is a person who was in the original film that I won't say. The trailers have done a great job at ruining what should have been a really huge surprise. But he pretty much fulfills the same role he did in the original, comes out at the same time as the original, does the same thing. This is really just a retread. And it's really disappointing to me, because when you theoretically could start a whole new series of these and go anywhere, you just do the same thing you already did, which just, it seems like a waste. Which is not to say that people wouldn't enjoy this movie. I enjoyed elements of it, but in the end I was kind of bummed out that it was the same thing I'd already seen, and to me not as much fun. But I could see kids liking it. I could see people who are not familiar with the original film. I don't think you'd need to see the original to have this one make much of an impact. And I think people who are easier to please than me probably will have a fine time with Mary Poppins Returns. There was note that Julie Andrews was offered a cameo in this film, and she chose not to. Some are twisting that into saying she chose not to so that she could do the voiceover of a giant sea monster in Aquaman. I don't think it was an either or. I think she just chose not to do it, probably wisely. When you watch the film, I could see where it would have been Julie Andrews, the role they would have given her, because it winds up being Angela Lansbury, which is not a big reveal. She's Angela Lansbury. She's an older. Nice to see her again. Angela Lansbury's in the film at the end, and a lot of the things she says you could see having a lot of weight if it was Julie Andrews, the former Mary Poppins, saying them. So it's still in theaters. It's, I presume, doing pretty well because I saw it several weeks late. And if you want, go see it. And if you want to send me an email at movies@CheshireTV.org and let me know what you thought. And if I'm full of sugar or not, you let me know. Up next, speaking of films with people who are older than me in them, I think by a decade or two, I was probably the youngest film person in the theater when I saw this yesterday, which is cool. Here we have the new film, directed by and starring Clint Eastwood as a man playing his age, a 90-ish-year-old man who is a horticulturist who finds himself on hard times financially, and he winds up running drugs for the Mexican cartels to help support his family, try to mend old fences, and ultimately to continue to survive as the Mule.
I wouldn't squeal if this was the tallest tree in Africa and there were 10,000 lions underneath. Oh! I squeal.
I love trailers. I don't like to watch, I think most trailers are not very good, and I don't watch many because I want to see the movie for the first time as it unfolds in front of me in the theater. But I love the art of the trailer, and I complain about, or I tisk, but I also appreciate a deceptive trailer. because you can make somebody think that a film is something totally different to get them in the theater, and once you have their money, if they don't like it, that's tough. This is a deceptive trailer to me. I thought this was going to be a very serious, very tense, very depressing movie, and I found this to be as much of a comedy as anything else for the most part. I mean, the subject matter is not very light. I mean, this guy's doing something very dangerous that makes the world a worse place to live and could be killed at any time. But it starts off like super light, and it's really funny. Clint Eastwood can be very funny when he wants to be. And it's only toward like the last quarter or third of the film that the consequences of his actions become very serious, and you see where it's going to go. And it does not end with a whole lot of, well, actually it kind of does end with a laugh, not to give anything away. So I love Clint Eastwood from way back. And I was really worried that his last film was going to wind up being Trouble with the Curve, which I didn't think was very good. I remember seeing that in the theater and thinking, wow, I think Clint's kind of lost it directing. And then I found out that he was just acting in it. And I'm like, oh, okay, somebody else directed that. That's fine. He's just for hire. So it's a sad and unfortunate attitude to have where somebody gets to a certain age where you see something they do and you're like, well, if they go out on this one, they went out high, on a high note. So that's what I'm going to probably keep saying as long as I see however many films he has left in him. He's not a young man. He's very frail looking in this film, and this might have been the first film that I saw. Clint Eastwood is a movie star. Tom Cruise is a movie star. John Wayne is a movie star. They don't really play roles so much as they play their persona in different situations. And this was one where I felt like Clint Eastwood was this guy. He was this guy who spent more time, arguably too much, according to most of the characters in this film, more time with his flowers than with his family. And he was always going off to flower shows and getting awards and going out with his rowdy horticulturist friends, and his family suffered it. He was never there. So I believe that he was this guy. He didn't seem quite like the tough guy. He could talk tough. They established that he's a Korean War veteran, but he's also like 90, so really how much is he going to do? When situations arose in this film, I didn't feel like, oh yeah, Clint's going to take care of him. I was like, Clint's going to get his ass beat in this film. And so you really have concern for him. It's maybe the first movie I've seen where if somebody was threatening to Clint Eastwood, I didn't just giggle. I was a little bit concerned that something bad might happen. Very strong cast in this film. It's full of faces you would recognize. Not all names, but faces. I mean, Andy Garcia plays the drug cartel, the drug lord, whatever. Diane Wiest plays Eastwood's estranged ex-wife. And everybody is good and a lot of people you recognize. And so the basic story is that he's fallen on hard times because of the damn dirty internet. Has taken his business away. His house is foreclosed upon. He's not there for his family. He can't help pay for his granddaughter's wedding. And he happens upon this offer to just deliver a package from point A to point B and don't ask questions. And I guess at the beginning of it, he's naive enough to not want to know what it is or not know what it is. But at some point he looks and he sees that it's cocaine or heroin that he's running back and forth. And he winds up becoming very successful at this and wind up, solving a lot of his financial problems, if not his interpersonal ones, with just piles of cash. And as the film goes on, there are complications, and he tries to repair relationships. And basically, the theme here is regret. It's one of regret. This man is clearly at the end of his life, and he's looking back on what he wished he had done differently. You see Bradley Cooper in the film as a DEA agent it kind of bops back and forth between Bradley Cooper and Lawrence Fishburne and Michael Pena as people trying to stop the drug flow into Chicago, and Clint merrily going about his way. And eventually, those two storylines meet. There's a sequence where Eastwood imparts some, don't do it the way I did it advice to Bradley Cooper, which is kind of nice. And ultimately, the theme is, put family before work, because in the end, your job won't be there, but your family will, unless you focus on work too much, in which case your family won't be there either. So I thought this was really, really good. This is a really high-quality movie. The audience I saw, very well-attended Sunday noon matinee. Again, all grown-ups, which is cool. Grown-ups who were interested in seeing a new Clint Eastwood movie, which was great. And I could hear some sniffles here and there, and I heard a lot of laughs because it was really a pretty funny movie for the most part. So I would highly recommend The Mule. It's been out for a while, so I don't know how much longer it's going to be in theaters. I would say once a couple more high-profile releases come out, which I don't think we'll have for a couple of weeks, you're probably going to see a lot of these holiday films start to get pushed out of theaters or into the second run houses. So better see them now than later. That's all that I saw in the theater that I'm going to talk about now. So we now move on to that which is available on the home video platform, service, subscription device, or format of your choice. Hi, how are you? Over here. First up is a film that makes me think about Halloween, which makes me think, why are we talking about it in January? Oh well. This is a film that I'll give it away. I actually like this quite a bit. It came out of nowhere. Nobody recognizable in it, really. Really smart concept for a horror movie. What we have here is a traveling, what do they call it? A traveling scare attraction, a haunt. Big haunted house, big sprawling haunted house that goes from town to town. And with this attraction comes a guy who kills people, who dresses up like somebody who works there, it's kind of ingenious because you expect that there will be people pretending like they're going to hurt you or pretending they're doing something bad to somebody else, but it's easily written off as, oh, that's all part of the act. So what do you do when you pay your money and you go and you get your wristband for a good time to be scared and you find out you and your friends are being murdered? Well, you greatly regret that you bought a ticket to see Hellfest.
You know what that is? It's the sound of a marriage breaking up.
This was one, a lot of horror movies, I love horror movies, but most I don't like. So that doesn't make any sense. You love horror movies, but most you don't like. But it's the ones that I do like that make it all worthwhile. It makes the pursuit worth it, you know? This was one that it looked like a dumb teen horror movie to me, but I went to see it down at the Alamo in Yonkers, and I saw it on the biggest screen they have, in the biggest auditorium they have, and I was the only one there. And Uncle Charlie, let me tell you how cool it is to see a horror movie when you think you're the only person in the theater. When you think you're the only person in the theater, but there might be somebody else in there. Is there or is there not? I'm pretty sure I was the only person in the theater. So I sat in the front row, and the blazing pretty colors, really cool set design. It's supposed to be like a high-end haunted house, haunted attraction that, you know, is over hill and dale and giant, you know, interior structures and all that. So it had a really cool look to it. I think it's an ingenious idea for a horror franchise, really, because you could keep making these, almost like the Final Destination films, which I loved. You can keep making these and make it set in a different place. It can be a totally different cast of people. You have the same faceless killer, and the haunted attractions, you know, play a part in that. So the concept to me, which is so ingenious, is that these people go to a haunted attraction. There's somebody there who's just a serial killer and he's killing people, but nobody looks twice. And he's dressed sort of like other people, so he can blend in with the surroundings. He can do things. He could do things out in the open, and people just laugh and point because they think it's part of the act. This attraction has this multiple levels of, you know, how hellacious and scary it is, and the final level is where you have to sign a waiver and that the people there can touch you. So that adds a whole other thing where if he's coming up to you, you're just like, oh, it's part of the act, until you realize, well, I'm about to be deceased. Nobody really recognizable in this film. Tony Todd is in it. Very, very tiny role. He played Candyman. He's sort of the only marquee name, if you will, in it. But that's fine, because movies that don't have big actors in them, these people, as far as you're concerned, they are those characters. They have no baggage. And one of Joe Bob's primary rules of horror films, anybody can die at any time. That's the way this film played out. I really liked it a lot. It leaves itself open for sequels. I really hope that we get more of these. We've had a few of these that I've liked, like Happy Death Day that I really liked is the sequel. The trailers are playing now. There's a part 2 of that coming out. And I like a good franchise that leaves room to improvise and go in interesting directions, and I think this has that. So it's a horror movie. It's violent. It's got profanity in it, so I would not say it's for kids so much, but it's if you like horror movies and you like kind of fun, not necessarily dark and disturbing, Hellfest was a good time. So now on to talking about the past, as we often do here. Here is a film that is set 20 years ago in a decade revered by many, not necessarily by me, and directed by Mr. Jonah Hill, his first directorial effort, I believe. And it's about a bunch of kids who sort of are aimless in life, and they go skateboarding, and they're drinking, and they're smoking, and they're cussing, and doing all the things that street kids like to do in the mid-90s.
Jimmy, please, not now. I'm too busy.
Whole lot of cussing in that trailer. So this is a film. Many people say this is reminiscent of a film I've never seen, Larry Clark's Kids from the '90s, which was about a bunch of aimless kids getting into mischief and being aimless in the '90s. So this is, I guess, based on the youth of Jonah Hill in the titular mid-90s, where it's kids who, they're not at home, their home lives aren't great, they hang around a skateboard shop, they do skateboarding stuff, they shoot skateboarding videos, they want to be pro skateboarders, they drink, they smoke, they do whatever. I didn't really care for it, partly because I have no love for the 90s. I have no love for that kind of culture or the music or anything, so the nostalgia thing was not for me at all. It was shot 4:3 square, which was a really odd choice to me. I didn't really understand why. I could understand if you were doing a movie like The Artist, where you're emulating a movie that was shot in that era in black and white 4:3 in the silent era, that's what it was. But to shoot something in the 90s, that just didn't make any sense. The only thing I could assume was because that's how camcorders recorded things. Although this isn't supposed to look like a camcorder movie. And that's how, if you rented a movie from the video store, it was 4:3 pan and scan at that point. That's the only thing I can think. It seemed an odd choice to me in this day and age to do that. But that's somebody being artistic or being difficult. So the cast is mostly people you haven't recognized. Lucas Hedges might be one of the bigger names in the film. He's in like every third movie now. He was in Boy Erased, and he was in Ben is Back, and he was in many, many things. He tends to play, the troubled teen or young 20-something. In this, he plays the older brother of our main character, he's just, that's another thing I don't get. So it's a very dysfunctional family. This youngest son, it's a single mom, the Lucas Hedges brother, and the young son who this film is about. And the two brothers fight all the time, which makes sense, and the mother's not always there because she's working to support the family, and that's cool. And the young kid just keeps acting out and going crazy and trying to strangle himself and doing all kinds of troubled youth things. And yeah, it's a drama. It's very casual. It's very almost pseudo-documentary vibe to it. It's an art house movie. I can't see this being something that a lot of just average mainstream moviegoers would really get off on all that much, unless you're really into the 90s or skateboarding or movies with kids who smoke and drink and cuss a lot, in which case you might be. But mid-90s was kind of I didn't find it that interesting. So now moving on to my favorite part of the show, that which is the Arrow Video Corner. Yo, right in the Paulie, right in the Paul. Paul got it right in his alien foot. We have one title this week. It's been a little bit of a slow stretch for Arrow, but we're going to be ramping up big time in the next couple weeks. Here is a release of a film from 1974. Hey, that was the year I was born. This movie came out when I did. This is a tale of a Mac Daddy pimp on the street trying to get to be number one, and the efforts of other people to make sure he doesn't get there. This is the tawdry tale of flashin', bashin', crashin', dashin', Willie Dynamite.
Now, just a minute, McGee. Fipper, McGee, don't go near that closet.
Don't fret yourself, Bud. I'll find it. It's got to be in here someplace. Oh, mackerel. Well, what do you know?
This was a really cool surprise for me. This is a movie I'd heard of for a long time. Arrow has had this out in the UK for years. This is a new release here on Blu-ray from Arrow, but their edition's been out for a while, which I actually bought before I knew it was coming out here, and we'll get back to that in a bit. It's interesting to me, when you think of, you'd call this technically a blaxploitation movie, many would. Blaxploitation, you think they're cheap, they're silly, they're low-grade exploitation movies, and they're the stuff of like AIP and Crown International and New World and all those kind of drive-in companies. But this was a Universal movie. This had money behind it, and it was produced by Zanuck and Brown, who did Jaws like the next year and went on to really big stuff. So this is of a different caliber than a lot of the other ones. And it is always funny because MGM did a lot of blaxploitation movies too. Once they saw there was money to be made, the big studios, the big classy studios, got as down and dirty as anybody else with the genre stuff, and they still do. That's why there aren't genre companies really that much anymore. So Willie Dynamite is not what you think it is. You think it looks like a thing that glamorizes this pimp, and he's the Mac Daddy, and he's gonna, take it to number one and all this other stuff. This is not. He's not a good guy in this movie. He's a nasty guy in this movie. Played by Roscoe Ormond, by the way. You don't know the name? Gordon on Sesame Street. Gordon on Sesame Street for decades, just before Sesame Street, played a pimp in Willie Dynamite. I think that's fantastic. So this is the story of this guy trying to be number one. He's trying to do in all his competitors so he can control the territory for prostitution in this area. And there are cops and there's a social worker who's trying to take him down. And it's really interesting to see this movie where the titular character is not the good guy. Like, you're not really rooting for this guy. And he doesn't see the error of his ways until maybe the very end of the film. He's trying to get over as Curtis Mayfield once sang, and he's not doing such a good job. It was fascinating to watch this. Now, it's a good drama. It's a good social issues, if you want to call it that, of the time. It's a good snapshot of the early 70s, but also the fashion. You saw the trailer, right? The colors in this are amazing. The transfer looks great, by the way, but the clothes are ridiculous. They're hilarious and apparently pretty accurate for the time. The cars, the interior decor, it is pimpadelic and pimptastic. It is unbelievable. So, I mean, you could watch this movie with the sound off and have a good time, frankly, laughing at the fashion. Music is outstanding, too. That theme song is a corker. And Arrow has a really nice transfer of this. Now, here's where I can do something I've never really done before here. I was able to compare the US and the UK editions. The UK edition, funny enough, is all regions, which I found out as I was getting ready to get rid of it in favor of this one. So the transfer is the same on both. The UK edition has a half-hour special that was done for British TV back in the 90s called Ice-T's Guide to Blaxploitation, where he interviews a lot of the players in blaxploitation movies of the 70s, either the actors, the writers, the directors, and a lot of film clips. And it's a cool little capsule history of that genre. That is not on the US edition that we're talking about here. The US edition has the trailer, same transfer as the UK, and also it has an audio commentary, which was new, and it's really good. I don't have my notes here for the name of the man who did it, but he's a black cinema historian. So it is a solid 90-something minutes of the history of black action cinema, the history of everybody who's in this movie, what was going on socially at the time, what was going on with other studios and the producers. It's solid. Sometimes commentaries can go either way. They can be boring, they can be too scholarly, they can be too loose, they can be play-by-play. This one was really good. This is one that you could listen to, as I often would do, rip the audio, listen to it in the car, and it's still a good listen. So I highly recommend this release if you like blaxploitation movies, or if you're just interested in cinema of the 70s. It's one that for some reason has never been talked about that much. I think it was available on VHS. I don't know if it ever had a DVD release. It was Universal, so obviously, it's not some obscure company that doesn't have the rights to it anymore. But it is out now, and I quite liked it. So we have about 20 minutes left, and I'm going to just kind of talk about some other stuff. So I went to a special event at the Alamo Drafthouse in Yonkers, which is my indoor theater home away from home, be it 4 hours away from here. And it was a Stephen King Pets Gone Wild triple feature put on by a group called Retro Picture Show, which does a lot of retro, usually sort of 70s, 80s horror double and triple features on Long Island. This was their first Alamo Drafthouse show. So it was, in order, Cujo from 83-ish, Cat's Eye from 85-ish, and Pet Sematary, which is soon to be remade from about 1989. And beforehand, there were all these cool, Alamo does a half-hour pre-show before everything they do, so you get all kinds of old trailers and TV commercials and interviews and clips and informational stuff related to the film you're about to see. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. And then we had, the whole thing was done on 35 millimeter film, which is not many places you can do this anymore. 2 trailers on 35 for other Stephen King movies before each of these films. And it reminded me, I've never been a big Stephen King fan. The movies were everywhere when I was a kid. They were like the horror staples. And some of them I watch now, I don't think they're that great. His writing I find eminently readable. His stuff is super easy to just jump into and read and let it wrap the words around you. But he has a lot of isms that bug me, like made up swear words and rock and roll quotes and people just not talking the way they normally would and other stuff. So anyway, that's all I'll say this. So seeing Cujo again for the first time. I don't think I'd seen it since I saw it on HBO in the 80s. I thought Cujo was quite good. It's a bit of a slow build-up where you get all these family drama things going on, and then it is ultimately a mother and her child trapped in a Pinto that doesn't work, funny enough, and a rabid St. Bernard trying to get in. And it's a survival tale, and it's really well done. I thought that was a heck of a lot of fun to see. Interesting to see the guy from the non-Brian Keith guy from Hardcastle and McCormick in it, and Ed Lauder, who I'm always happy to see in a film, always pretty much playing a dirtbag. Then after that was Cat's Eye, which was an anthology film, much more of a comedy than I remembered. I don't remember it being funny, but it was very funny. And you have 3 little stories, and there's a little kitty cat that sort of literally runs through each story and connects them all. And funny enough, at the beginning of this movie, this cat is running through a neighborhood and basically is chased by Cujo. So we get these two, the movie that we just saw connecting to this new movie. It runs past Christine. There are all these little Stephen King references throughout. And later in the movie, somebody's reading a book of Pet Sematary, which is the next film I was going to see. So you have 3 stories, one of which is called Quitters Incorporated, where James Woods is somebody trying to quit smoking, and he finds this company that's run by a former mafia family led by Alan King, who uses very extreme methods to make sure he doesn't smoke again. It's very funny. The second story is called The Ledge, where Robert Hayes plays a man who has an affair with a mobster's wife, and the mobster makes him walk around the edge of a building, and if he can manage to do that and not fall, he can get a bunch of money and run off with the woman's wife. And then the third one is basically, stars Drew Barrymore, and it's about this little girl who finds this cat, and there's this little evil gnome creature in her bedroom who's trying to steal her breath while she sleeps. It was a lot of fun. The stories are cool. I love anthology movies. I think for me, the third story was probably the weakest, but it was really cool to see. The print looked brand new, which is cool because when you watch old movies in the theater, it's sort of an opportunity to go back in time a little bit, and whatever barriers between now and the past can be removed, that helps that illusion. To me, if you watch a movie at home, you're looking around and you see everything in your house, and there's no illusion of anything other than that you're sitting on your couch. But in a theater, it's theoretically dark and there's no distractions and it's just you and the movie. Well, when the movie is from a long time ago and it looks brand new, you can almost zap yourself back to 1985 and that you're seeing this for the first time. Third up was Pet Sematary. This is where it gets interesting for me. I saw Pet Sematary when it came out opening weekend back in '89. I was 14, had to have my mother take me to the theater, which was unusual because she was not a horror movie person, and she sat with it through me and was scared and manipulated in a good way by the film like we all were. And I remember Pet Sematary being very intense. It's very, very scary, very disturbing subject matter and some really creepy stuff in it. And there's a remake on the way, which we actually saw the trailer for yesterday in front of this movie. And I'm anti-remake. I think they're almost 99% worthless. They're almost always forgotten in short order, and everybody just goes back to the original. But watching Pet Sematary again, certain aspects of it really didn't work for me. There's a character of a college student who gets hit by a car and dies and shows up as a ghost who's trying to warn our main character not to bury things in the pet cemetery. And it just seemed cheesy to me. Fred Gwynne, most people know as Herman Munster, or don't remember the character name from Car 54. He plays the next door neighbor who's a Maine guy, and he has this cartoony Maine accent, which really grated on me fast. It seemed really silly. Fred Gwynne was really good in it, but the accent was just a little much. And then the daughter in this family, the basic premise is this young family, doctor, wife, 2 kids, moves to this farmhouse in Maine, finds out there's an old pet cemetery up a pathway behind their house, and then finds out that beyond the pet cemetery, there's an Indian burial ground where if you bury something there, it comes back to life. But it comes back not happy and friendly. So, their cat gets hit by a truck. There's a big highway next to the house. The trucks are always going by. They bury the cat there. It comes back. It's not a friendly cat anymore. And then the level of thing they buried in there ratchets up immensely with really awful consequences. So the daughter in the family keeps having dreams, like these psychic dreams, which again to me seemed really cheesy. I'm sure they were in the book. I'm sure there were large parts of the book. They're just Stephen King isms that I find cheesy. So seeing that and some other elements, it didn't really work for me this time. And I was really surprised because I thought going into this triple feature yesterday, I was mostly going to see Friends. I thought it would be fun to see these movies I hadn't seen since I was a kid again. But I thought the first 2 would be weak and Pet Sematary would be the home run. And if anything, for me, the first 2 were really strong and Pet Sematary was on kind of shaky legs for me. So there's a new version coming out with Jason Clarke, who's been in a lot of stuff. He played Ted Kennedy in Chappaquiddick, and he was in one of the new Apes movies, and he's been in a ton of stuff. He was in First Man. He played Buzz Aldrin. He's in the Dale Midkiff father role, and John Lithgow is in the old Maine farmer Fred Gwynne role. And this is the rare remake where I'm actually like, I'm curious to see what they're going to do with this. They may improve upon the original in a way. They may not. I don't know. I feel like the new one doesn't have a very distinct look to it, but it looks like everything else that comes out now. And frankly, I think if you look at the original Pet Sematary, it looks like everything else that came out in 1989. So anyway, that is to say, I saw those 3 movies. That's what I thought of them. And I'm kind of curious about the new one. In the past, Tom and I have done a best worst of the previous year episode. Tom's not here to defend himself or say his opinions, and I don't really have the time to prepare a separate show for that. So I just wrote it all down, and I figured I would run down my list of what I thought was the best and worst of the films I saw that were new in the theater in 2018. You have to forgive me for reading from the cheat sheet here. This is in no particular order, by the way. So for worst of the year, Action Point, the movie that was based on Action Point, I think that's what it was called. It was a Johnny Knoxville movie that was sort of like a Jackass movie. All the stunts are real and all that. And it was based on some incredibly unsafe theme park in New Jersey that existed in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And I thought it wasn't funny. It was crude and not funny. And the fact that the stunts were real didn't mean that they were exciting or fun to look at. Mandy, people love this movie, Mandy. People are crazy. I have friends who this is like their favorite movie of the last year or beyond. I just didn't like it. It's Nicolas Cage as a lumberjack, I believe, and his wife gets kidnapped and abused by some weird cult in the woods in the Pacific Northwest, and he goes on a revenge mission against these bikers that look like they're out of Hellraiser, and there's drugs and weird knives and guns and fire, and Panos Cosmatos did it, who did Beyond the Black Rainbow, which was very stylish, which I kind of did like and appreciated for the score. This has a good score and some interesting visuals, but I didn't really care for it. Tag, which was a film based on a true story, all-star comedy cast about these guys who were friends as kids, and they had this game of tag that has never stopped, and you never know when they're going to tag each other and all that. I just didn't think it was funny, and in the end of the film, you see clips of the actual guys doing some of the actual sting tags or whatever, and to me, that would have been more interesting than the alleged comedy that we just sat through for 2 hours. Truth or Dare, pretty bad, pretty universally acclaimed as not a good horror movie from last year, about this game of Truth or Dare that's done in this Mexican temple, and it was just lame. It was lame, and they had this thing where everybody's faces stretch really wide, rubbery, digitally, which just looks laughable rather than anything else. I thought that was crap. A Wrinkle in Time, based on a very popular children's book from a couple decades, turned into just a very bland and cheesy and silly movie with Oprah Winfrey and a lot of weird eye makeup and strange dresses. I thought it was not successful to me. Insidious, The Last Key, it was the most recent Insidious movie. I liked the first Insidious. I didn't see the second, and this third one, while it was cool that they gave Lynn Shay a whole lot of screen time, I didn't think it was very good. It was just jump scares and kind of hard to look at. The Meg, that was the big giant prehistoric shark film with Jason Statham in China. It was dumb. It was garbage. Now, I like dumb garbage, but I like dumb garbage that you can see. And this was one of those movies where it was shaky and overcut and over-edited, and what am I looking at, and so much CGI, and it was, I would watch The Last Shark way over this. The Spy Who Dumped Me, which is Mila Kunis and I can't think of her name from Saturday Night Live and Ghostbusters, sorry. They are women who are on the run because Mila Kunis' ex-boyfriend was a spy, and there's killing people, and it was just not funny and mean-spirited, and the action was really poorly done, and I just didn't feel like it was worth sitting to the end of. Rampage, I almost forgot what that was for a second. This is a movie with The Rock based on an old arcade game from the 80s or 90s. A giant gorilla and a giant something else, and they fight, and it was hard to look at and dumb, and all the funny lines weren't funny, and it was moronic garbage. And the worst, easily the worst, this is actually #1 worst movie last year for me. There's a little nugget of dung called Show Dogs. It's a new euphemism. It used to be Furry Vengeance. Oh, my stomach's upset. I got to go take a Furry Vengeance. Show Dogs is almost the new one. This was a story about a talking dog, a dog whose thoughts we see. Can other people hear him talk? I'm not clear on this. Goes undercover, streetwise tough dog cop, goes undercover as a show dog in Vegas with Will Arnett as a partner to bust some kind of a ring of. It was awful. It was terrible. It wasn't funny. It had fake outtakes at the end, which if you're going to write outtakes, make them funny. They weren't funny. It was really, really, really bad. I couldn't believe I was seeing that in the theater. Now, okay, now for the best. I have 8 minutes. Rest. The best movies I saw last year, in no particular order, A Quiet Place. This was the film directed and written by John Krasinski from The Office and other things, the Jack Ryan TV show, with Emily Blunt, our new Mary Poppins, as a family who live in this world, shot in upstate New York, where you can't make a noise because there are these things, are they aliens, I think? These things that are out there that respond to sound. And if they hear you, they will get you. And it is made clear at the beginning of the movie, what they do to you is not pleasant and you don't recover from it. So it's a family who's found a way to live a life, a sheltered life, by not making a sound. And it is incredibly tense. It's one of the most tense movies I've seen in a long time. It's a film where you realize you're not breathing. You realize that you're in the theater not making a sound because you don't want that thing to get you. You're so into this movie. It's A Quiet Place was maybe the best horror movie I saw last year. The Favorite, which is still in theaters. Olivia, well, see, I don't have my cheat sheet. Anyway, it's a Queen of England, and two women are currying for her favor to be the favorite, the titular favorite, trying to be the person who gets the most out of being a friend of the Queen, who can influence the Queen and all that. It's gorgeous to look at. It is devilish and delicious in how unsavory the machinations are between these two different women to try to be the right-hand person of the Queen. And it's kind of sad, too, at the same time. I would highly recommend seeing that in the theater while you can, because it's gorgeous to look at. 8th Grade. It's a little movie by Bo Burnham, who is a guy who apparently was a comedian who was big on YouTube, and he directed and wrote this first feature, I believe. And it's about a young, awkward girl in junior high going into high school who's just looking for friends, looking for a social circle, dealing with social media and YouTube and trying to be popular that way. It's very, very contemporary, but at the same time, as a manly male type person who is not a kid anymore, physically, I could relate to a lot of it. I thought it was really great. It's funny, it's sweet, and it's sad, and it's the kind of movie that I would hope that parents and female children, especially of that age, would actually watch, because it might prepare them for some stuff. Speaking of family films, Super Troopers 2. That was one of my favorite movies from last year. Other people think it's not very good or silly or dumb, and maybe it's silly and dumb, but I thought it was the funniest thing I'd seen in quite a while. Not many comedies I find funny. I just watched it on Blu-ray recently. I was doubled over laughing all over again, and I knew what was coming. It's really funny. It's just about as good as the first one as far as I'm concerned. I hope they make more of these films. The Broken Lizard guys took a good decade to make a second one, so who knows if they will. I don't know if it did well enough to warrant another movie, but it's the same cops from the first Super Troopers, now disgraced, who are brought back to take over a town that was in Canada, but turns out it's now part of Vermont, so it's them warring with Canadian locals and Canadian Mounties, and a lot of pranks back and forth, and I thought it was wonderful. And you get Linda Carter in a feature film again. Isle of Dogs was the new Wes Anderson film, stop-motion animated, sort of like Fantastic Mr. Fox that he did a few years ago. And it's about this slightly future alternate world where there's been some virus that's killed most of the pets, which is how Planet of the Apes started, if you do your research. And all the dogs are shuffled off to an island, like this trash island where they live and have their own societies and hierarchies, and it's about somebody trying to find their lost dog who's there. It's sweet, it's gorgeous, it's very funny, it's very impressive on a big screen, which is, that opportunity is now gone, but it's totally worth watching, and it's less precious and finicky than a lot of Wes Anderson stuff tends to be. Blind Spotting was a movie that I think sort of lived in the shadow of Sorry to Bother You, but it tacks some of the same themes, but is very, very good. About a guy, a black guy who's on his last week of parole, and if all goes well, he's a free man and he can move on with his life. Unfortunately, his old best friend from the neighborhood, a white guy who wishes he wasn't white, is very thuggish and street and gangster and all that, and is continually threatening the straight and narrow path that our hero is going on. It says a lot about what's going on in the country now. It says a lot about the human condition, and I like it quite a bit. And it's funny at times. Won't You Be My Neighbor? The Mr. Rogers documentary. Very funny, very sweet, very moving. Makes you wish there were more people in the world like him. It gives you something to aspire to and how you conduct your life and that your dealings with others. And it was a pretty moving movie. A lot of people have watched it, and I would say certainly have Kleenex nearby. Mission Impossible Fallout, loved it. Best action movie of the year for me. Amazing stunts, amazing action that you can actually see. It's astounding to me that a film, 6 or 7 films into an action film series, can be as good as this and be one of the best in that series. A Star is Born, I really liked it. Sue me. It didn't win any Golden Globes last night, but that's fine. Bradley Cooper directs and co-stars in sort of a remake of the Barbra Streisand version of A Star is Born from the late 70s. Lady Gaga is the young singer-songwriter who hooks up with an older, sort of on his way, she's on her way up and he's on his way down, and they find each other, and it's a story of showbiz and love and life, and Andrew Dice Clay is really good in it. I didn't realize it was him at first. That was kind of amazing. And lastly, Incredibles 2. Incredibles was super great. A great superhero movie, a great cartoon, a great adventure movie, very funny, very cool, very referential to old media of the past. Incredibles 2 is more of that. Thrilling, funny, cool, possibly seizure-inducing, and really fun. It had some nice little Johnny Quest. Treating Johnny Quest as though it was maybe a real thing was kind of cool. So I made it through all of that. And see, we didn't have to waste the whole show to do that. So next week, we have other films to talk about. I'm not quite sure what they will be yet. I see on my list 3 titles that I've never heard of. So it's entirely possible that theaters will not get any of these. And I may not have much new to talk about, but there are certainly more on video. We have a couple of Arrow titles. We have the Halloween, you want to call it a remake? No, you want to call it a sequel that erases all the other sequels, is coming out next week, and a whole bunch of fun stuff. So I am going to go and edit the swears out of one of the trailers that you might have seen earlier. So I will cut out a little early. I will bid you adieu, wackadoo, and thank you for showing up and watching me, and I will see you next week. Bye. Thank you.